All right, and if you're watching the recording, hello, welcome to the Rebel Game Devs meeting of September 19th, 2022. Thank you so much for joining us. The meeting will start shortly. Please hang on.
Cue elevator music.
That's the best I'm gonna get. Yep. All right. What I'm most afraid of is actually some kind of ping or call. There's so many ways to contact me now. And so whether Teams or Discord or my phone or the computer is going to have some kind of flag is concerning, but I think I disabled everything. Yeah. Let's. Oh.
Who's playing any interesting games?
Always a good question.
I'm playing Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2.
Ayo,
fantastic.
the remake?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it was free on PlayStation like last month or something, so I grabbed it. And man, it still has like the best soundtrack out of any game
That's
ever.
what I'm saying. You know what? We're going to go on the same publisher, right? So the Modern Warfare 2 beta just dropped this weekend, right?
Mhm.
So I've been messing around with that.
That's cool.
I've been playing some zombie games, Project Zomboid and 7 Days to
Ooh.
Die.
Oh, okay. Sweet. All right. So it is 6 o'clock. Before we get started with your talk, Gunnar, I just want to address one thing very quickly. So, as some of you may know, there was some things that happened on Saturday that weren't the greatest. Basically, Amanda, our president, is no longer our president. She resigned. We've put up a notice for everyone to go ahead and look at. I've addressed everything that she talked about. I've addressed the future for this club, so please know that everything is going to be okay, and we are doing our best to ensure that any of the things that Amanda mentioned won't happen again in our club, and that is all I have to say. So, thank you for joining today's meeting. I really appreciate y'all for coming, and today we have guest speaker Gunnar Clovis, and he's going to be talking about making fun games. So, Gunnar, you want to take it from here?
Yes, please. So I'm also going to try and be a little bit more extemporaneous this presentation, and this is kind of always a unique format, streaming over Discord. So I do want to invite everybody to please chime in if you have any questions at any time along the way. And yeah, I also can't verify or predict rather the exact skill level of everybody because the club, I love the Rebel Game Devs Club. I've been involved with this for a few years now. Thank you to Rich. And yeah, I love seeing new people join in this club or just game development in general. So I always depends on what your skill level or experience level is in making games. I want to keep this a little bit on the shorter side so we could have more time for Q&A to talk about making fun games or the industry in general. This has basically been my full-time job for my entire career. And so, yeah, happy to answer any questions you're too afraid to ask a professor or whatever context. And I'd also love at the end to hear about some of your specific projects and see if we can maybe tailor some advice that's more grounded and particular to what you're actually working on. But let's talk about just fun games and game mechanics in general. If you don't know me, my name is Gunnar, and I'm always super happy to be here. And those of you that have spent some time in this club or doing games, making software, you may have found that making games is not quite the same thing as playing games. We all enter this field because we love video games or board games or whatever it is. And so, yeah, we want to be involved in making it. That's the same as everybody. You know, people that become musical artists, they love music. People that love movies, those are the people that really try to be filmmakers. And so game development is the exact same way. However, it's a different skill set than playing games. Obviously, it's not as easy as tightening up the graphics on level 3. And it can be an interesting experience, but it's a great career. Game development is a great career, and especially these skill sets of using major engines like Unreal or Unity is very applicable across various different fields, whether you're making video games directly or many different types of subgames that people often don't think about. In this case, UNLV is perfect spot for doing casino, real money gambling games. And so I'm sure a lot of you are a lot more knowledgeable about that field than the majority of even the working game industry is. And that's a really, really valuable skill set and really valuable field. But even as far as, you know, working on medical software, training software, architecture programs, there's so much that can be done with these same kind of skill sets. Even just the generic skills of making software, making apps within something like Unity or GameMaker or even Construct, they're very, very applicable skills in even jobs like warehouses, warehouse work, or areas you might not expect, accounting, any kind of marketing. Really, it's very applicable because anything that you're able to take in user inputs and process data in a meaningful way and display that's at the core of what games are. Games are essentially, it's video interactive software. So it's sprites, images moving on the screen that encompasses basically everything, right? And so it's a much more flexible skill set than people often consider, and it's treated me very well in my work and career. So I love game development. I've found that I actually like making games more than I like playing games because the experience of making a piece of software that's really fun and really engaging, and seeing other people playing it, seeing their faces light up that they're really, really enjoying it, and seeing people laugh at a game that you've made is just a one-of-a-kind experience. And so I've spent 10 years trying to share what knowledge I may have so that others may share in that experience. So yeah, I can talk about some general practices for making games. Of course, it's good for your brain. It's good for working together, making friends, and being creative and imaginative. But I really love people being able to have fun with a game that I made. And yeah, that's less intuitive than it might seem. Fun is this very strange and kind of elusive concept. We all viscerally understand fun, but it's a very difficult thing to actually define, especially in an academic sense. And so a lot of game development is, it's a bit more art than science. And your mileage will, of course, vary. The biggest thing is always going to be personalizing your development and your design to your specific project, your specific audience, and even your own brain as a developer. So again, at the end of the presentation, I'd like to talk about your specific projects if we can, to see if we can make something a little bit more specific. So a bit about me as well. I know quite a few of you here, but yeah, I'm Gunnar Clovis. I've done quite a few things now. I've been making games for well over 10 years in my entire career. Was originally studied at DigiPen Institute of Technology in Redmond. I worked at a few startups after that. And then I had to move to Vegas and became involved with UNLV and the International Gaming Institute, Center for Gaming Innovation, helping Dan Saul run that program, which was fantastic. And now that's been wonderful to see it flourish into the DraftKings Innovation Studio and that whole partnership. I also founded the RGD Las Vegas for a while I was there, and ran the Global Game Jam in Vegas for several years, which some of you have attended, as silly as that was. I love running events. I love running game jams. I ran a few Tri-Jam events. The Triple Tri-Jam was a big success. Most recently, I ran the Greenlight Jam alongside Indiecade, which was really great. And in terms of work, after leaving UNLV a couple years ago, I went to work for Galaxy Gaming, which was which was a really interesting experience. That was a table gaming company. Vegas, mostly a gambling-focused town. When I had to come to Vegas for more family reasons, coming from Seattle, which is very video game focused, it was a big adjustment. And you'll find that as life is very unpredictable, but these skill sets are very versatile. If you're able to make software, and especially interactive video software, which is, again, making games is actually a lot harder than anyone really thinks. It's accessible, and anyone can do it. It just takes time and work and effort, like any other skill set. But you can really find work and flexibility in any environment you really find yourself throughout your career. So Galaxy Gaming was very interesting, working on administrative marketing things, game designs, and games. Basically, what's the proper term? Demo games for sales purposes, which was very interesting. I made my kind of own engine architecture there, and then I left Galaxy back in February of this year to work for a company called AGS, American Gaming Systems. That's one of the biggest slot casino gaming manufacturers. And so I worked there as a upper level game designer, which was also very interesting, similar work, a lot of math, a lot of making software. And then I recently left AGS to come back to a company called House of How. So while most of my positions have been as a game designer or inventor, I'm currently a game developer, more on an engineering side, at House of How, which is a kind of mid-tier game development studio. I was actually there right before I left Seattle for Vegas, when it was just a 5-person startup still. Now we're solid 55 people and intending to double our size pretty rapidly, hoping to be top 10 independent game studios within the next 2 years, which we see them on track for. It's a lot of really great ex-Microsoft leads and talent, and as well as John, who's a great director from EA, and so lot of veteran people in the lead roles, and we're growing very rapidly. So again, if I know this is a college group, so those of you that may be graduating, may be looking for a position, I'm actually serving as a recruiter for House of How quite a lot as well. So if you're interested in maybe pursuing that kind of work as an artist or an engineer or designer, talk to me afterwards. But yeah, that's what I'm currently doing. It's hard to talk about House of How because basically everything that we do is under NDA and not publicly available. So I've gotten in trouble for having too loose of lips, as I tend to be quite an open book. But we do some paid work for Minecraft, as well as a project called Wanderword. The other things that we do is some casino stuff that I can't say in specifics, and then DLC work for some AAA IP, and making quite a lot of AAA stuff that we're just not allowed to talk about right now. So that's my main job. I also am a teacher now at a summer camp called Game Worlds, which is this very, very successful 10-year-long game development summer camp that's run in Austin, for good 10 years by some good game industry talent. And I'm starting a fall program, so that's a lot of fun. And just as I helped with event planning in Vegas with IGDA and UNLV and Global Game Jam, that kind of thing, I help with a few different groups here in Austin now, such as Games Y'all and Game Makers Unite, which is a lot of fun. The community has been very gracious there. And I'm actually going to be running the Global Game Jam for Austin as well in the coming year, which I really didn't expect, but happy about that. So let's stop talking about me, talk about what do we do to make a game fun. So again, these are just going to be some general, very generic tips and tricks that you can use to make a game more fun to play, especially tailored to a smaller 2D game project. Making a game by yourself or with a couple friends in a few days, weeks, or months is awesome, and I highly recommend doing so. But unsurprisingly, that's different than making a game with hundreds of people in a company for years and years. So my advice here pertains to a smaller game that's more able to be made in a more reasonable amount of time throughout a game jam, or even just in the off time as a full-time student. Much better to scope small, scope down, make something that you can start and finish within a month, regardless of what your other schedule is, or even less. I'm really quite a fan of making games in under a day. And that smaller scope is going to be very beneficial to actually finishing stuff, which is how you really learn. The act of making games and finishing games are actually kind of two different skill sets, and doesn't matter how great a game could have been. Everyone has massive, huge ideas and ambitions for the games they can make, but what is actually in front of people, what's actually playable, is a different story. So I really, really recommend making lots of small games, especially when you're starting out, that you can really, really gain some experience in completing stuff and shipping, whether that's just publishing a small game jam game to itch, or actually trying to go through on publishing to the App Store or to the Play Store, to Steam, or wherever else. So again, generic tips, going to be kind of fast. I always talk kind of fast. If you miss something or don't understand something completely, it's fine. Please chime in or hold questions till the afterwards. Want to open the floor up to you so I can hear about your specific projects and answer questions. So let's talk about fun. Again, games are fun. We like games because they're fun to play. It's rather silly and intuitive, but why is a game fun? What is fun? This is a really hard question. It seems kind of silly, but it is. Some people, spend their entire lives learning why things are fun and how to make something fun. This is something you can get PhDs in and still not, I would say, be able to replicate with perfect accuracy. Like every game is going to be unique. The technology is always going to be different, and your audience is always going to be different. So it's really difficult to break down scientifically in a very replicatable way that people can understand on paper and repeat easily. So we've all had fun before. I hope you're having fun making games and playing them, or finishing your degree, or whatever you like to do. So again, on an intuitive level, we all understand fun a little bit, but talking about the science fun and the really in-depth psychology of it for hours and hours and hours, I'd love to do that. That's what game design college students do for years at university. We don't have that much time, so just say some general words. Fun is different for everybody. A game that is fun to one of your friends might not be as fun to you or another friend. We all have different preferences. We like to watch different movies, listen to different music, and play different games, and even play the same games in different ways. So a good way to make your games fun is to allow your game to be played in different ways. So this could be as simple as allowing your player to customize their character, their weapons, their armor, their abilities, or their play style. Even just picking whether they're a boy or a girl, like in Pokemon, is a pretty good idea. But Pokemon also lets you use different Pokemon. Everyone's team of Pokemon is very different, and even within a team, you can use different moves, different items, completely different builds and play styles. This change of play style, and that allows Pokemon to be more fun to more people. You can, of course, also look into the Pokemon community, Pokemon being the most profitable franchise of all time. I like to say the most profitable thing to, at least entertainment thing to ever be created in the history of the galaxy. Because till we can prove ancient aliens or other kind of alien life, we're it on Earth. And so the things that we make are really rather impressive and impactful, given that kind of alone in the history of time, which I just think is kind of fun. If your game has different classes, like a wizard or a warrior or a rogue, that can allow the player to play in different ways. If your game has different weapons or vehicles, letting the player choose which one to pick up and use can allow more people to enjoy your game in slightly different play styles. I remember playing Bioshock Infinite, a very famous AAA game that I hope a lot of you have played, and that great example of a game that has so many different weapons, and you can really pick whichever two that you wanted to stick with and use. So I was very silly and only used the sniper rifle and the rocket launcher in all of Bioshock Infinite because of the mechanics there to kind of always find ammo for whatever your weapon was. So being able to customize playstyle is one of the best ways to make a game more fun, as it's just making it more adaptable to more people. However, don't go overboard with this. It's cool to have different ways to play a game, but maybe just pick 2 or 3 different weapons or ideas to go with, especially when you're starting out. Because if you try to add too much, it will be too much work and really be a drag to you and your game. Always want to scope down and make something that's very achievable. Again, we all have infinite ideas. Everybody wants to be the idea guy in game development, but there's no such thing as the idea guy. Every programmer, every artist, every producer, every rigger, on my team, we have so many different people, and everyone has ideas, and everyone tends to have good ideas. Not that all ideas are good, because ideas value much less than execution. So again, starting small, scope things down, and then as things come together into a playable and hopefully fun state, you can always add on to that base of construction that you've developed. So trying to make everyone happy often ends up making no one happy. So that's another pitfall that you can really fall into with this idea of trying to diversify the play style opportunities for your players. You never want to pull in too many directions too much. Again, it seems like a lot of this advice is contradictory because game development and game design in particular is really complicated and very personal, more art than science. So a lot of this is going to come down to playtesting and iterating on your specific game. But I'd like to keep in mind the specifics of your project and your preferences, because something that is true to you, to your likes and dislikes, and who you are as a person, as a developer and designer, that's always going to ring more true for your audience as well. People can innately really sense when something is genuine, even a piece of art, whether it really came from the heart or not. Again, very flowery, very, very high level language that is difficult to define in the nitty gritty on paper. But as humans, we're complex, social animals, and we can all understand this on a rather intuitive level. So don't be discouraged if somebody doesn't like your game. The best way to make your game fun is to make sure that the people who play it will find it fun, because it's the type of game that they would like. Everybody likes different things, and not every game is for everyone. Plenty of people don't like Fortnite, Minecraft, Roblox, Pokemon, Zelda, Mario. Take your pick. Many of really all of the most popular games of all time, not everything is for everyone, and that's okay. For those of you who like a bit of research and reading, you can look up Bartle's player taxonomy sometime if you haven't seen it before. So that's Bartle. This is a basic way to describe how different types of players like to play games. Killers enjoy getting high scores, speed running, topping leaderboards, being the best, competing and winning. Achievers, like me, like doing everything a game has to offer, leveling up, getting achievements, and beating a game with measures of success that are built into the game, or at least its UI. Explorers like to immerse themselves in the game world, discover things, and explore this virtual place. And socializers play games for the social aspect, making friends and talking and playing with other people. Everyone will, of course, be a mix of these four groups. It's just a fairly rudimentary taxonomy. But the simple categories that might be helpful to you to determine the type of player that you're most trying to appeal to. Pick maybe one of these groups and decide to try to make them happy with your game's ideas. For example, if you're making a competitive game for killer type players, if you're just making a game for your small friend group and you happen to notice that tends to be their personality, or again, if you're trying to make a small game jam game and publish it for free on itch, picking this kind of broad scope of your target demographic, very useful. If it's a bunch of killer type players, you might want to include a high score and a leaderboard, or maybe some built-in speedrunning components, like a really nice built-in timer. But you probably don't need a social component. Having a bunch of chat systems might seem like a fun programming task, and it is. But yeah, if that's not who your target demographic really is, it's not going to be worth your time. So is that make sense to everybody? Any questions so far? I know I've been going kind of fast. All right. So another good way to make your game fun is to consider pacing. This is a little more advanced, but basically you don't want the same intensity level for your game the whole time. It's best to have varied pacing, ups and downs throughout a game. If your game is always really slow, simple, then it might get boring. But at the same time, if your game is always fast-paced action constantly, that will be stressful, and your players might eventually get burned out and bored of that too. So instead, change the stress level, the complexity, or what we call the tension, and the difficulty of your game back and forth over time. At one point of a level, it should be really difficult, but then it calms down and becomes easier for a bit. Have different obstacles and change and mix them over time in different ways. For example, in a Mario level, Mario faces different obstacles along the way. It would be boring if a Mario level was just ask Mario to jump on 300 Goombas in a row in a straight line. And thankfully, because of Mario Maker and Mario Maker 2, we can see this in really clear contrast. So many, if not the majority, of Mario Maker levels that are made by mostly children and first-time game designers will make these kind of very simple, very repetitive games or levels where it's a cacophony of Koopas or Goombas or Fireflies or whatever it is on the screen. And the same way, you can also run into a lot of those levels that are just way too easy or way too difficult and stay that way the entire level. And you can feel as a player intuitively, it just doesn't work quite as well. So instead, in real Mario level made by Nintendo and their designers, sometimes there's Goombas, but sometimes there's Koopa Turtles, and sometimes he gets a mushroom power-up, and sometimes there's bullet bills or spinies or gaps, pipes, piranha plants. Sometimes the ground is flat, and other times there's hills and slopes and blocks and stairs or holes in the ground. Different ideas come and go, varying the pacing. Ideally, you want your game's pacing or intensity to start lower, go up and down through a game or level, but end high. By ending on that high note right before the win, that relieves the tension and makes players kind of let go of their breath and celebrate the victory. This is why the boss goes at the end of a level instead of the start. I challenge you, if you're using a tool like Mario Maker or Little Big Planet or Dreams or nice level editor of any game, or you have your own kind of structure built up where you can edit levels very well, try making a level where the boss goes at the start. That just inherently seems silly because we as players understand that's not how it's supposed to be, but we might not have considered why. Because if you have your boss at the start of the level, it's starting at the peak of the difficulty, and then the rest of it's going to be down slope, and that just doesn't feel right. It doesn't feel fun. The tension gets relieved way too early and never builds that same kind of crescendo. So, be bad pacing to have the big bad boss at the start of the level instead of at the end. So, let's go through some other smaller ideas that really don't deserve quite so much soliloquy. That again might improve the feel and fun of your game, but afterwards still would really like to hear about your specific projects if we can. So again, these are generic tips and tricks, might not always apply to your game, but they're particularly focused on game feel. Game feel, or juice or polish as we call it, describes the, again, rather vague feeling or emotion that a game gives to its players. A game with more polish or better game feel simply feels better and more fun to play. I want to offer these ideas to you and then hopefully dig into the specifics of your games. So first off, add sound effects. This often goes overlooked. Everyone knows this, but in a game jam, frequently people will leave sounds to the very end. I would recommend, when working on a new game project, add sounds right away. Like as soon as you add an input of any kind that the player can press left or right or jump or shoot, add a sound to go along with that action immediately. It adds so much to your game, even if not especially in the prototype stage, and can really propel the development as you find the game more fun. It becomes more engaging instantly and definitely makes playtesting an easier prospect. So add sounds, any sounds, they add a ton of fun and good game feel. Again, whenever the player presses a button, should make a sound. Again, a lot of more art than science. Don't go overboard, but any jump, hit, attack, explosion, an item pickup, anything else in your game, such of that where it's rather important and it's not happening, every frame. We don't want an explosion sound effect every time the player takes a step. So, maybe you do. Maybe that would be fun in a smaller sense in a game jam term. So again, mileage will vary. I recommend experimentation and playtesting, but make everything you can that seems reasonable have some kind of sound effect. There are so many free sound effects online. You, of course, can work with somebody at UNLV, maybe work with an audio student to do some Foley or mixing of some sort. But there's also a lot of great tools online like BFXR that can just make really, really nice, really crunchy pixel type sound effects. Pixel isn't the right term, but low bit retro sound effects for free, really quickly, really easily. And you can also just make sounds with your mouth, like very silly, but adds a lot to the game, and I think can be rather fun. So make the sounds loud and clear, but not obnoxious. And once you have those sound effects, make them very slightly in pitch, randomly whenever they play. This is rather easy to achieve in basically all engines. It should really only be a single function call. This adds a lot to the game, making the sound effect randomly, lower or bassier or higher and brighter. Makes the sound effect not sound stale and always kind of fresh and slightly different, even if you jump 100 times in a row. Adds a lot of replayability and, again, making these sounds less obnoxious. If your game has combos or chains, like picking up a bunch of coins in quick succession, you might, instead of doing a random pitch variance, just rise it a little bit and raise the sound effect just a tad in pitch for each coin you pick up in some kind of sequence. Adding music, similarly, if you can, adds a lot to the game. Does not need to be much. Doesn't need to be the best music in the world. Of course, we all tend to really gravitate towards game OSTs. I've been replaying Mirror's Edge, one of my all-time favorite games, and I love the soundtrack for that. But making a soundtrack such as a AAA game like that is not obviously achievable for a student or a small team. Even professionals, oftentimes, if you're making something in a smaller scope like a game jam. But having any kind of simple or generic music, even kind of background atmosphere noise, just quietly in the background of your game, it's always a good idea. The sound effects are more important. This is a big thing that people get wrong early on, is prioritizing music over sound effects. Mention sounds first. So even after you add music, make sure that your sounds are prioritized in the mixing so that they're heard first, clearer, crisper. If audio has to be cut, prioritize the sound effects that are really letting the player know that something has happened. But music, always really good to complete your game and make it more fun. Adding particle effects, another big one. Everyone generally knows about this, but it always bears repeating. You can really never add too much particle effects, with a big asterisk, of course. But if anything in your game happens, you should try and make something, whether it's small puffs of dirt or dust, clouds, stars, smoke, rain, anything else that can just kind of spray out when it happens. It doesn't even need to be that realistic. You can see in that central example of the trail effect behind the player, like that really represents anything in the real world, closest maybe being motion blur. But having that feedback on the screen is just always really good, so the player can be keyed into what's happening. The eye is naturally, the human eye, we're hunter animals, we're drawn to movement. So whenever the player should be looking at something that's important, such as a bullet being shot, an enemy dying, something important appearing on screen, adding much of sounds, good to key them in, but especially those particle effects that can blow out and move a little bit, really draws the eye and focuses the player's attention. When the player jumps or lands in a platform game, that's a good example, or leave a little trail of footsteps or stars when the player moves. Using screen shake wherever possible. Well, actually, I'll take that back. Not wherever possible, but whenever something big or bad happens. If your game, again, is a shooter, maybe every time the player fires their weapon, a little bit of screen shake happens. But that'll depend on the specifics of your game and how often projectiles are being fired. So instead, it might be whenever the player gets hurt or hurts an enemy, there's some screen shake. Again, this is all about just making players' actions feel more impactful, adding more visual feedback to the player that something important has happened. If your game has a camera and you move around the world, like a top-down RPG or top-down shooter or side-scroller, making the camera's movement as interesting, just as interesting as the player's movement, is vital. It's another thing that people really often forget about and leave to last minute or never handle at all. But yeah, the camera should be treated as important as your player character in terms of animation. So an easy way to do that is just adding some camera lag, making tweening animation so that the player character might be able to run ahead of the camera, and the camera has to kind of struggle to catch up and has this kind of squash and stretch, which I'll mention in a minute. These kind of animations to the camera, just like it was a character in the world. And here in Nuclear Throne, great example, simple 2D top-down game. The camera is moved to center between player character and the cursor. This again is actually really, really simple, really cheap and easy trick to make the camera movement rather interesting. I do believe there's some tweening going on here as well, but having that instantaneous movement whenever the player moves either their character or the mouse, which is going to be happening constantly, that really draws the eye, focuses to what's important. And in this case, is in a top-down shooter game like Bullet Hell or something like Nuclear Throne, focuses the attention, the space of the screen and the attention of the player onto what's really important, which is the enemies that are in front of the player. Another easy way to improve a game that might be in development, a small project you're making for a game jam or a college project or whatever it may be, is just speeding it up a little bit. If everything in your game moved 10% or 20% faster, how does that feel afterwards? That's something you should be able to test really easily. Just a universal kind of scale multiplier on the the delta time, the time scale, or if you don't have a system like that, maybe just the movement speed of everything on screen. Everything just a little bit faster. How does that feel? Playtesting that. Often that simple change can make a really boring game rather fun. Another great example is actually, I love this game, Ink. This is made by a friend of mine who went to Digipen as well. This is a good way to leave signs that the player has done something and gone somewhere. Leaving wreckage, footsteps in the sand, the paint trail in Splatoon, defeated enemies on the floor like in Hotline Miami, or even just destroyed blocks that the player has kind of bashed through in a simple game like Mario. Everyone likes to go back to Mario. It's a super easy game. Everyone understands. The world should just look differently after the player has interacted with it. Again, just providing this feedback to the player. Another great way is when the player is attacking. A lot of games tend to veer towards combat as the main interaction component. That's just because it's a lot easier to represent visually in terms of sprites moving on a 2D screen than making something that's a little bit more passive or social. Those ideas are harder to represent. So when the player hits an enemy, make that really clear that it's happened. Add all of the feedback that you can, the sound effects, making the enemy flash white or red, changing their sprite or their animation, whatever pose they're in, making them get knocked back or float up in the air, like in this Castle Crashes example, making damage values or little numbers, points that the players earned float above their heads. Just all of it is just a lot of minor detail. None of it is very difficult to implement on its own, but combined together, it can make this really wonderful, very visceral experience of what we call a very juicy game that just is giving a lot of feedback to the player. Another easy tactic is to give everything in your game a personality. Literally just strapping googly eyes onto a bunch of your objects, into the walls or the boxes you're pushing around in some kind of 2D puzzle game. It's really all about doubling down on whatever your game is about. So if the game is mostly about interacting with enemies, focus on the enemies. Maybe give them googly eyes or just something that expresses a personality. If it's more about this kind of passive puzzle solving, working through an environment and paying attention to small details, maybe adding those kind of personalities to the background elements could be really nice. Giving things faces and expressions, capitalizing on the human natural intention to anthropomorphize everything. And it's a really easy way. This is what books are all about. A reader imagining a world that's much deeper than is actually on the page. That the human brain will fill in all sorts of gaps and project emotions onto everything that doesn't have emotions. Your video game characters will never have emotions. They're sprites on a screen. Any text that they say is stuff that you wrote. It's all predetermined. The voice lines, everything is very static and artificial in a game because it's an artificial creation of humanity. But letting the player fill in those gaps, giving them opportunities to use their imagination, even in just a really quick subconscious way, implying more intelligence that's really there in some kind of AI enemies, or just emotion. How many times have you seen someone react really viscerally to a game character dying, or maybe stealing something in some kind of open world game, and then regretting it because the AI reacts in some way, and it's just implying more than it's actually there. Little emoji like pop-ups, really easy, really cheap way to get the player to feel like the characters in the world are feeling more than they actually are. Just little emoji pop-ups whenever the enemy sees the player do something. Really easy way. And this can get a little bit more complicated, but I believe in y'all. Adding tweening, or what we call in-betweening, just everywhere you can, makes the game really polished and fun. This is animating something according to curves that feels more natural or just more fun. This is something you should be able to do with code pretty easily in any engine. It's such a fundamental thing that most game engines will have some plugins either from their content store or itch or anywhere else that should be able to just really generalize this action of tweening stuff. This image actually comes from I think it's called Tween GMS Pro, which is a really great plugin for Game Maker Studio 2, which is what I've worked in for the last few years in my career. And but you should be able to do this with Unity, with Unreal, to really anything. Just use some simple math functions you can find online, and hopefully some built-in functions for your game engine. Things look best if they move slow at first, then speed up, and then slow down at the end. Again, varying the pace of their movement and just looking more realistic. In the real world, things never move at a constant pace. Cars don't flip between 0 and 60 miles an hour like a light switch. They have to accelerate up to top speed and then decelerate down to a stop. So this is a really classic example from the 12 principles of animation of just simple slow in, slow out, tweening animation. You really use this on everything to make everything in your game feel that way. Looks really nice. Animation principles like squash and stretch, or moving like a classic Mickey Mouse cartoon, or really any good cartoon character, is achieved fairly easily with tweening. And finally, use a good color palette for your game. Look up just good color palettes, or use a color palette generator website like coolers.co to make an appealing palette. Then color everything in your game using these colors, more or less, and or at least use a color palette per character. This is an easy way to make your game more visually appealing and cohesive. Really recommend this if you're not an artist or don't have an artist on the team, or actually, especially if you have multiple artists that are working together. Getting these kind of design conventions of similar color palettes and apply that to other principles as well can really make the game come together and feel more cohesive. Now, no, that was a lot of information. And the truth is, as always, we've barely scratched the surface of all the potential changes you could add to your game, different ideas and improvements. Game development is an infinitely broad field with so much to try, learn, and have fun with some practice and some time. you can make anything you want. And I believe you can make your games very fun. I hope you gained something from that list. And again, now I'd really like to hear about your specific projects. But let me leave you with one more piece of advice. This applies to everyone, always, all the time, no matter what game you're making. If you don't write down or remember anything else from this talk, I want you to please remember this. Playtest. Playtesting is the most important part of making a fun game. All this means is just showing your game to other people. Get your friends, your classmates, your family, anyone else you can to play your game and watch them play it. See what parts they like best, what do they struggle with, where do they tend to go first, or what do they most like to do? Did they laugh or smile? Get others to play your game, watch them play it if you can, and listen to their feelings and feedback. Learn what's working best and not working as much for your game so you know where to make changes, try new ideas, or double down on what's working best. You should try to playtest as soon as possible and as often as possible. There's no better way to make a fun game than to get other people to try your game and learning from your feedback. And thank you all for listening. I hope that was helpful as a broad discussion of general game design principles and can help you improve your current or future games. Let me exit out of this. All right. So that was actually ran a little bit longer than I was expecting. For those of you still here, everyone's muted, but do you have any questions or would you like to ask about the industry or your specific projects? I'm always really happy to help with advice that's more tailored.
All right. So I do have one question.
Please.
So you were talking about your history with working in gaming, professional gaming and gambling and that kind of stuff, right? What would you say was one of your favorite projects to work on throughout the time?
That's a great question. I've learned in recent years that me personally, I'm just very extroverted and very social. So I'm actually most proud of my work running events, running game jams, and getting people into game development. I'm really excited to be teaching again, doing that part-time. As in terms of games, I've made hundreds of games of all different sizes, and I'm proud of all of them pretty much for different reasons. Making something really rapidly is very, very satisfying, very rewarding. But I've also, had game projects that I've spent more than a year developing, and that is also really nice when you have a pretty big game that takes several hours to complete. However, I'm also particularly proud of my work on Bandito Poker, which was the game I made at the UNLV Center for Gaming Innovation. For those of you that don't know about that, that won the 2019 UNLV Game Dev Showcase, and I was able to sell that at the beginning of this year, sell that patent, which I'm over the moon about still. Actually selling a patent to market is really difficult, so really happy that pushed. But yeah. Does anybody have a specific project that you're working on currently that you'd maybe like to show or ask about? Even if you just, you're working on XYZ genre, and, advice about a particular genre of game, I think might be a bit more helpful than the general stuff, perhaps. If not, I'm also happy to answer questions about, just working in the industry. If anyone has questions about working on teams versus working alone, that was mentioned to me in a DM. Really, yeah, anything that I have no, obligations to UNLV or to keep a job there or anything. So I'm happy to tell you more grounded stuff about working in this field. I'm, of course, a fan of it. It's what I've done full time forever. But it's also, like any field, has its issues, and I'm happy to discuss the maybe the more uncomfortable things as well, if that's useful.
Yeah, I guess I can shoot out a few.
Please.
So, would you say that as a game dev here in Vegas, would you say that most of our opportunities are going to be remote, or would you say that there are local office game dev jobs to be found in Vegas?
That is a fantastic question. Remote work is now a thing. It's here to stay, and that is So I moved to Austin, less than a year ago for my work at AGS, and then I left that company, and now I work remotely. So it's kind of silly that I moved here now, but that just is the reality that game development and software development in general, most of it's going to be remote. And from the employer's point of view, it makes perfect sense, and not having to pay for a lease of an office building, huge subtraction of overhead, and putting that back into the company. We can afford to pay people more if they're able to work from home instead of having an office. So remote work is absolutely becoming the dominant force in game development. That was always going to happen, but lockdowns accelerated that by a good 15 years, I think. So a lot of remote work opportunities. And again, for those of you that are graduating or interested, I honestly might be able to help you get a job with my company because we're just expanding really rapidly. But there's basically an infinite amount of opportunities for remote work. However, and I'll say the negatives as well. When you have an economy that is built on remote work, you have access to infinite jobs. That you could get a job anywhere in the world, right, if you work remotely, but you're also competing with everybody else in the world. So it is a pretty fundamental shift to towards hiring and working in the industry at large, because now I'm constantly getting pestered by like Meta. Meta is trying to ramp up so hard, but they're hiring people from anywhere, which is pro and a con. So in that case, I think just practicing your social skills, your general charisma, and just professionality, and things like your resume and portfolio are always important. And I think just getting more so, because now you're having to compete with more people than ever before, but there's more opportunities than ever. And I also will say, to not be all doom and gloom, something we actually talk about a lot here in Austin, that there are more game development positions open right now than there are possibly people that could fill them. Game development is a massive industry, especially when we include gambling, which most people don't. But combined together, it's tremendous. And there's so much work that needs to be done at all times. It's such a profitable field that there's always going to be work. If you know where to look, and it's really a lot about connections, like in the industry. It's a surprisingly small world. Again, I left Seattle in late 2017, and when I did, I was working at a small startup called House of How, and now 5 years later, I'm back there, and we're 55 people because the CEO called me up and said they want to be back. You're always going to run into people that and again, clubs like this, Rebel Game Devs, is a great group. Anything like this is always going to be really useful, because you don't know, maybe 2 years from now, someone from here, even if you're not great friends, but just an acquaintance, might have a connection. They might have a friend of a friend situation that can get you a position. I was talking to Rich about this a few weeks ago, about how like a century ago, it was estimated that the world had, I think, 6 degrees of connection. That sounds right. Maybe it was higher, like six or 8 degrees of connection, meaning that it only took 8 steps of interpersonal human connections for any particular person to know, by extension, any other person. That it's a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend of a friend, or acquaintance of acquaintance. That's how it used to be. But now, due to the modern world and social media, everything's about 3 degrees of connection. That everyone right now in this group, it's wacky to think about, but mathematically, we're only like 3 degrees of connection away from every other person on the planet. This is including really kind of more tenuous or stringent connections on social media and that kind of thing. But friend of a friend of a friend, or acquaintance of acquaintance of acquaintance, encompasses basically the entire planet. So you're going to run into people that you've seen before. Always be mindful of how you treat people. I will also say that, your college students, I wouldn't have the super high expectations. Everyone makes mistakes, and it's okay. But good relationships of any kind, including professional and work relationships, is 99% communication. So keeping good communication with everybody that you meet where you can, or at least having that opportunity to call back, really good for getting any kind of jobs, especially with remote work. But in regards to working locally in Vegas, as the question asked, Vegas, as I mentioned, is not a video game development city. Used to have a little bit more going on with Petroglyph, and now that's basically dwindled up. There's a few people that have indie studios in Vegas, but they're not hiring sources, and they're not that successful. Like the most successful indie development studio out of Vegas is just Tom Happ, who's not really even a studio. He made Axiom Verge, that Metroid-like indie game. He lives in Vegas, and that's about it. Otherwise, the Petroglyph is pretty small now. They're still around, but not quite that much going on. However, we have a lot of opportunities in Vegas for casino game development, for making real money gambling games, which is generally not what anyone who gets into video game development wants to do or expects to do. I certainly didn't. I studied in Washington. I'm mostly from Washington. I expected to be at Microsoft, and I most likely would have been if I had stayed. But in Vegas, it's what's the term? It's a tourist town. It's all about your casinos on the Strip, and so there's a lot of big companies, and you actually make a lot more money than you do in the video game industry. A lot more job security, making casino games, whether that's for in-person table games like I did at Galaxy Gaming, or for slot machines like I did at AGS, or for online casino gaming, which is what I'm mostly doing at House of How now. But I can't say more detail than that. A lot of opportunity for local stuff in Vegas, and I would recommend pursuing that, especially if you're coming out of college and you need a beginning job. Look for companies like AGS, IGT, SG. There's a great amount. I saw Dan Saul just poked in here a second ago. If you don't know him, he's a director for the Center for Game Innovation, and he's awesome. That program is fantastic and can really help you kind of get some baseline knowledge or your foot in the door with the casino gaming element of the game industry. And the skill set is, again, super versatile, super applicable. Like 70% of slot machines now, I'm pretty sure, are made in Unity. It's super applicable no matter where you go. So don't think that you will get pigeonholed if you take a job in casino gaming for a few years coming out of school. You can easily pivot to or making indie games or making mobile games or working on Steam projects, whatever you prefer. But I will say again, I will be more honest about this from personal experience. The casino gaming stuff, it's much better salary, much better job security than the video game industry. And so I do recommend that, especially if you have a lot of student debt like I do. Are there any other questions about the industry in general, or maybe resume stuff coming out of college, something that's specific to you guys, what you're working on?
So this isn't my question. This question belongs to Point Centered, but
Okay.
They ask what kind of development platform do you use? Do you use a traditional desktop, a 2-in-1 laptop? What hardware do you use? That's their question.
Gotcha. All right. Yeah. So I grew up really poor, and I've been making games since I was 14. And so most of when I started, I worked on school computers in middle school and high school. And then I got a laptop, and so I just used a pretty simple laptop for development for a very, very long time. And you can get a lot done with low-end hardware. Obviously, it's not going to be as graphically intensive and stuff like particle effects. I couldn't really manage so much when I was a student. But then going into the workforce, I generally used, again, laptops that were provided by my company. I had a very simple kind of Dell laptop at Galaxy Gaming that It's not like I could have made 3D stuff in it, but we were working on table games. So making 2D poker style, blackjack style games, not a problem at all on even a really cheap laptop. And now I do have. I actually just got my first desktop ever. Less, like maybe 5 months ago, something like that. And I spent way too much money on this. It's like a 5K laptop, so it's all the craziest features, but I don't actually need that for what I really work on. Dev stuff, pretty versatile, and there's actually huge benefit towards working on a lower end laptop, or even just mid end laptop or desktop that allows you're starting from the baseline of less impressive hardware. So you're inherently going to make your game that you're making run well on your laptop. And if it runs well on your laptop and your laptop's kind of bad, then it's going to run great on higher end hardware. So there's a huge benefit to that. That was very funny in Galaxy Gaming. I actually had a worse computer than a lot of people in the building, which I was kind of frustrated about, frankly, unsurprisingly, but did have the benefit that I got the game to work okay on my computer, and so it ran amazing on everyone else's. Whereas, if you start with a really high-end machine, you might make a lot of mistakes and not catch, memory leaks or going overboard on particles, going overboard on sound effects. Again, want all those things, but there's a really difficult tightrope act with these kind of things. Optimization and performance can get really tricky. Generally, my career, I've been focused on smaller 2D prototype type work. Now I'm working on more technically intensive stuff that has to run like really well on mobile phones and platform independent. And so dealing with that on a larger team like I have now, you'll often have somebody whose job or specialty will be focusing on that optimization and hardware performance. But doesn't matter. Don't worry about what you have. Game development is more accessible than it's ever been in human history because so many of the game engines are free. Unity, Unreal, GameMaker, Godot are the four main ones I think anyone should really play with. There's also Construct, but I'm not sure that's free. But it's generally all free. RenPy is also free if you like visual novels. So software is all free, with strings attached if you actually make money. But makes it really democratized that anyone can make games. Literally anyone. Doesn't matter what your background is. Doesn't matter what ethnicity or culture or sex, gender, whatever. None of that matters at all. All that matters is work. How many hours are you putting in? The same as any other skill set. If you want to get good at making movies, you have to just make movies. If you want to get good at writing books, you have to write books. And in the immortal words of Jake the dog, being bad at something is the first step towards being kind of good at something. So don't worry about where you're coming from, what hardware you have, what your rig are. You can totally make games. Any other questions about? Any other questions about the industry or your specific projects? I know it's a 7 p.m. in your time now. Yeah, I think that's right. So all good if we want to end it here. I appreciate you letting me come out as always.
Of course, thank you so much for coming on, Gunnar. Like your insight into the industry as well as like your collaborations with us, amazing. And it was really enlightening to hear you talk about what makes the game fun.
I'm glad. I'm always happy to help out however I can. I love that this club exists. Thank you, Billy. Thank you, Rich and Adrian, and everybody that's helped, and Johnny. It's helped build and run this club over the years. I really appreciate it.
Of course, and thank you, Gunnar. So, just a few more things before this meeting concludes. So, what I want to say real quick is that we are going to launch our first asset shuffle. So, I'm just going to go ahead and show off a quick example in Godot. Right, so what's going on is that we are going to be giving out like basic packs that have assets you need. So this is just a couple things. This has pipes, it has a scrolling background, and a bird, and a Godot. And if I go ahead and run it, it has basic controls, right? Nothing special, but this is basically giving you a starting point for you to expand on. And we have this in Godot, and we also have the raw assets available, but we are also creating a Unity version. I will have that out before the end of today. So asset shuffles are going to last 3 weeks, and in 3 weeks we'll have a showcase. Everyone can show off what they've done with the asset shuffle. This is encouraging you to play around with the engines that you want to play around with, try different things, try like different gameplay parameters. We're just providing a couple assets for things to be made easy. So that is what asset shuffles are. We also will be having what's called draw, compose, write. So what that is basically we're going to be encouraging our members to that aren't like focused solely on like programming, but like other art things. So drawing, composing, writing. We will announce that the theme and all that stuff as soon as the end of tonight, and we should be having our showcase around a week earlier than the asset shuffle. So stay tuned. And then I think that should be everything for this meeting. So does anyone have any questions regarding the asset shuffle or regarding draw, compose, write? All right. Well, that concludes today's meeting. I want to thank you all for being here, and a special thank you for Gunnar for taking the time out of his day to come in and talk to us. You know, that was really nice. So next week's meeting is going to be virtual, and we haven't planned out exactly what's going to happen, but we're going to have something, so stay tuned. And we will be having our first in-person meeting very, very soon. So please stay tuned for that. And as always, thank you all for coming out today, and I hope you have a wonderful evening. Have a good night, y'all.
Good night. Thank you so much for having me come out.
Hey guys.
Of course.
Yeah.
Thank you.
Take care, everybody.
Take care.